What's happening, everybody? It's Rob from the Basement Bike Shop, and in this video we're going to go over the removal and installation of BMX threadless stems. Now, most of your stems nowadays are very similar. Whether they're top load or front load, they have a 4-bolt system that bolts the bars on. And then where it connects to the fork, you either have a clamping system in the back where it's split, or you have an internal split wedge fork clamp like the stem we're going to be installing. This stem is the FSA Black Eye Stem. It's a little old school, but I run this stem on all my bikes, so it's just one of my preferences. If you're planning on doing your stem removal and installation in a bike stand, you're going to want to block up your front tire. A lot of times when you remove the stem, the fork and front wheel come shooting out the bottom. This is actually the one installation I like to keep the bike on the ground for. You can just take 2 storage bins and create a little kickstand for the back wheel. Then it's time to start the removal of the stem. Now remember, no matter how vastly complicated these stems get, there's always 3 things you have to loosen and tighten: the compression bolt into the fork, the stem bolts that clamp it onto the fork, and the bolts that clamp the bars. You always start by loosening the bolts that clamp it to the fork before you loosen the compression bolt that holds the whole headset and everything tight and together. Now, before I remove anything, I'm first going to loosen up all the bolts. It's just easier to loosen the stem when you can hang onto the bars for leverage, and it's easier to loosen the bars when the stem is still on the bike. When I loosen the bars, I do it about a 1/4 to a 1/2 turn in a star pattern, the same way I tighten it. It just keeps from bending any bolts or kinking your handlebars or anything. Everything comes off smooth and straight, and everything goes back together the same way. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that as I loosen my handlebars, I take out the back right or top right bolt completely. This way, if there's no writing on my stem, I still know what right side up and upside down is. It's always good to put it back on the way it came off. Even though it's supposed to be completely symmetrical, sometimes a bolt is off, and it won't matter as long as it always goes back on the same way. And then I'm going to replace the cap just so that I don't lose any parts. And now we can take the stem completely off. Now, if your new stem is different thickness than your old stem, you might need to add or remove spacers. Just make sure that your fork is a little bit shorter than your stem. You don't want the top cap nut to actually hit the fork. And we'll put a spacer in, and then put our stem on. Now, if you do have this style with the internal split wedge fork clamp, make sure that you line it up properly so that it slides onto your fork. And then we'll put the compression stem bolt back in. And we'll snug it up so it's somewhat tight for the rest of the installation, but don't worry about setting the exact tension yet. We're going to do that all at the end. Remove our front stem cap. Again, top right bolt I take out completely. I wouldn't have to on this stem because of the writing. I can tell if it's right side up or upside down. Now, as you can see, during this whole installation, I never had to disconnect the brakes. As long as you have something you can set your handlebars on that's close, you shouldn't have to disconnect them at all. Unless you have a detangler. Now, it's always a good idea to have a little bit of grease on the threads of these bolts. I recently took this off of another bike, so it was already kind of greased up a little bit. I didn't have to do that. Well, the first thing you're going to do is just get all your bolts to thread in straight. Just put each one in and tighten it in just a little bit. Enough that you know the threads are grabbing. And then just start snugging it up evenly. And then make sure the knurl in your bars is usually centered in the center of your bars. So I usually just center that knurl in the stem. Then I snug my bolts up so they're not loose anymore. Adjust my bars to make sure they're centered. And then you want to look at the gap between the cap and the actual stem on the top and bottom and make sure they're the same. Do any adjusting you have to. And then we're going to tighten it in a star pattern. And I just do about quarter to half turns at a time. Now I'm stopping at a certain tension. So I'm not turning a certain distance. I'm trying to get them all the same tightness. And then after that, I'll go ahead and turn it the same distance every time. Then after that, we're going to set the tightness. I don't think that's even a word. How tight our headset is by tightening our top cap. Now you want it to still spin freely and easily, but not have any wiggle in it when you move it back and forth. Then once you got that set, you can tighten the bolt or bolts that clamp it to the fork. Now first I snug it up. Then I take a step back and set my bars and stem straight with my wheel and fork. Now some people do it from sitting on the seat. I do it from the front. It's just whatever works best for you and your eye. Once you get it exactly where you want it, you can finish tightening it the rest of the way. Now this system only has one bolt from one side. If you have the other style, you'll just alternate tightening the top bolt and the bottom bolt a little at a time until it's all the way tight. Now if you have a problem with your bars slipping, I usually don't, but some people do. They say that a good idea is to sand the paint of where the bars meet the stem off of the stem and then put the whole thing back together. And now you're ready to ride. Thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, you can hit that subscribe button and I'll keep these videos coming. I try to do a video a week. If you don't want to miss it, you can turn on those alerts. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, you can comment below or you can send me an email. Thanks again.